The expensive champagne in Kieran Valdez's glass couldn't distract him from the realization that he was the only single man at his friend's baby shower. As CEO of Pinnacle Construction, one of the East Coast's most successful development firms, he was used to being surrounded by business associates and ambitious colleagues, not cooing women passing around tiny onesies and guessing baby names. Yet here he was, standing awkwardly in his friend Mark's backyard, wondering how long he needed to stay before making a polite exit. "Kieran, you actually came." Mark slapped him on the back with enough force to almost spill the champagne. "I didn't think you'd survive a baby shower, man." "I'm still not convinced I will," Kieran replied with a wry smile, adjusting his tailored navy suit. At 35, he had built an empire but somehow missed building a life outside of work. "But I wouldn't miss this. You're going to be a dad, that's huge," Mark beamed with pride. "It is. And Elise is over the moon. Speaking of which," he looked over Kieran's shoulder and waved someone over. "There's someone I want you to meet. Elise's best friend from college just moved back to the city." Kieran turned, expecting another happily coupled woman with a baby gift. Instead, his gaze met a pair of striking green eyes that belonged to a woman who looked as out of place as he felt. She wore a simple emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, which fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Unlike the other guests who cluttered their wrists with charm bracelets and statement watches, she wore only a delicate silver chain. "Kieran, this is Ruby Patel. She's a pediatric surgeon who just accepted a position at Metro General." "Ruby, this is Kieran Valdez, my oldest friend and the workaholic I've been telling you about." Ruby extended her hand with a confident smile. "The famous CEO, Mark mentioned you might not show up because of some emergency board meeting." Kieran took her hand, noticing it was warm despite the cool spring air. "The board can survive without me for one afternoon. I'm surprised Mark mentioned me at all." "Oh, he didn't just mention you," Ruby said with a laugh that seemed to light up her entire face. "He gave me a full PowerPoint presentation on why you're the most eligible bachelor in the tri-state area, complete with your Forbes cover and net worth estimates." Mark shrugged unapologetically. "What? You're both single, successful, and terrible at dating. I'm just being efficient." Kieran felt heat rise to his cheeks, something that hadn't happened since his first major investment pitch a decade ago. "I'm not terrible at dating. I'm selectively engaged in my social life." Is that corporate speak for hasn't been on a date in 2 years? Ruby asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Before Kieran could defend himself, Elise called for everyone's attention to start the baby shower games. Mark gave Kieran a knowing look before rejoining his wife, leaving Kieran and Ruby standing alone by the drinks table. "So," Ruby said, taking a sip of her sparkling water, "are you going to suffer through baby bingo or are you planning a strategic escape?" Kieran checked his watch, a habit from years of back-to-back meetings. "I should probably stay for at least one ridiculous game. You." "I'm the godmother-to-be. I'm contractually obligated to stay until the last gift is unwrapped and properly documented in Elise's thank you spreadsheet." "Sounds like my kind of organization," Kieran said, finding himself genuinely smiling for the first time that afternoon. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all day. Come on, CEO Valdez, I'll protect you from the diaper-changing relay race." As they walked toward the games, Kieran found himself studying Ruby more closely. There was something refreshingly direct about her, a quality he rarely encountered in his world of careful corporate politics and strategic social climbing. The afternoon passed more quickly than Kieran expected. Ruby turned out to be fiercely competitive at baby shower games, even the ridiculous ones involving measuring tape estimates and baby food taste tests. When she triumphantly won the baby knowledge quiz, beating out several mothers in the process, her victory dance made Kieran laugh out loud. "How does a pediatric surgeon know the exact weight of celebrity babies?" he asked as they stood by the dessert table, sampling miniature cupcakes with blue and pink frosting. Ruby shrugged. I read a lot of waiting room magazines during my residency. Turns out celebrity gossip is excellent brain candy after 18-hour shifts. And here I thought you were memorizing medical journals. Those too, I contain multitudes, she said, wiping a smudge of frosting from the corner of her mouth. What about you? What does the mighty Kieran Valdez do when he's not building skyscrapers and attending awkward social functions? Kieran hesitated, realizing that his honest answer more work, and occasionally a solitary drink while reviewing quarterly projections sounded pathetically empty. I run. Early mornings, Central Park, it helps me think. A runner, Ruby's eyes lit up with interest. Marathon, half usually, I did New York full last year. Me too, she looked genuinely excited by this coincidence. Though I nearly died at mile 22. There's a particularly cruel hill right when your body is betraying you. I remember that hill. I may have cursed it in 3 languages. You speak 3 languages, 4 actually. Spanish from my mother's side, French and Italian for international business. Ruby looked impressed. Say something in Italian. Se la donna più interessante ci abbia incontrato in molto tempo, Kieran said without thinking. Translation. You're the most interesting woman I've met in a long time, he admitted, surprised at his own candor. Ruby's cheeks flushed slightly, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. The moment was broken when Mark announced it was time for gift opening, and Ruby was called to Elise's side to help document the presents. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to leave, Kieran found himself lingering, making conversation with Mark's relatives just to stay in Ruby's orbit. When she finally gathered her things to leave, he made his move. Need a ride anywhere? I have a car waiting. Ruby hesitated. I was going to take the subway back to my new place. I'm still unpacking, so it's a disaster zone. I could help, Kieran offered, then immediately wondered if that sounded too forward. With the heavy lifting, I mean, I'm told I have useful muscles underneath all this corporate attire. Ruby laughed, the sound warming something inside him that had been cold for longer than he cared to admit. Useful muscles, huh? Well, I do have some bookshelves that need assembling, but I warn you I'll pay you in takeout and boxed wine. Sounds like the best offer I've had all week. They said their goodbyes to Mark and Elise, who exchanged not-so-subtle looks of approval as Kieran led Ruby to his waiting town car. Ruby's new apartment was in a historic brownstone in Brooklyn, a far cry from Kieran's glass penthouse in Manhattan. Boxes were stacked in organized chaos, each labeled with precise medical handwriting. Family photos were already arranged on a side table, parents with kind smiles, a younger sister who shared Ruby's eyes, holiday gatherings that looked warm and genuine. So this is how normal people live, Kieran joked as he removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Ruby tossed him a screwdriver. As opposed to billionaire CEOs who probably have staff to breathe for them, millionaire, not billionaire. And I only have a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week, not a full staff. He began assembling the bookshelf, following her detailed instructions. Only a millionaire, I'm practically slumming it, Ruby teased, ordering Thai food while Kieran worked. The evening flowed with unexpected ease. They ate pad Thai from cardboard containers while sitting on her half-assembled furniture. Ruby told him about her medical training, her passion for pediatric cardiology, and her recent decision to move back to New York after completing a fellowship in Chicago. I miss the energy here, she explained. Chicago is great, but New York is New York. I understand, Kieran said. I've had opportunities to expand to other cities, but something about this place gets under your skin. So, Pinnacle Construction. Tell me how a guy who looks like he's barely old enough to rent a car became CEO of a major development firm. Kieran laughed. I'm 35, but thank you for the compliment. The short version is that I started in commercial real estate right out of college, made some lucky investments, and founded Pinnacle 10 years ago. We specialize in sustainable urban development. That's the elevator pitch. I want the real story. No one had asked for the real story in years, Kieran realized. People were usually satisfied with his success, not interested in the journey. He found himself telling Ruby about his immigrant parents, his father a carpenter, his mother a seamstress who worked multiple jobs to put him through college. How he'd worked construction during summers, learning the business from the ground up. The first small property he'd renovated with borrowed money, sleeping on site to save costs. "I promised my parents I'd build something that would last," he said, surprising himself with the honesty in his voice. "Something that would matter." Ruby studied him thoughtfully. "And has it mattered?" The question caught him off guard. "By most metrics, yes, we're profitable, growing. We've created jobs, revitalized neighborhoods. But..." Kieran looked around at Ruby's half-unpacked apartment, the family photos, the well-worn medical textbooks, the small plants already placed on the windowsill. "But sometimes I wonder if I've been building the wrong things." The confession hung in the air between them. Ruby didn't rush to fill the silence with platitudes, which Kieran appreciated. Instead, she refilled his glass with the surprisingly decent boxed wine and clinked it against hers. "To building the right things," she said softly. They talked until well past midnight, finishing the wine and the furniture assembly. When Kieran finally called his driver, he felt strangely reluctant to leave. "This was unexpected," he said as they stood at her door. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" Ruby asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Definitely good. The best unexpected in a long time," Kieran admitted. "Would you like to have dinner sometime, a proper one, not eaten over cardboard boxes?" Ruby smiled, her green eyes warm. "I'd like that, but I have a condition." "Name it." "No fancy restaurants where they serve microscopic food on giant plates and you have to whisper. I want real food and real conversation." Kieran laughed. "I know just the place. How's tomorrow night?" "Perfect." As his car drove him back to Manhattan, Kieran realized he hadn't checked his email once during the entire evening, a small miracle in itself. He found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The Italian restaurant Kieran chose for their first date was tucked away on a side street in Little Italy. Family-owned for generations and far from the trendy spots frequented by his business associates. The owner, Giuseppe, greeted Kieran with a warm embrace and led them to a secluded corner table with a red checkered tablecloth and a flickering candle. "You come here often?" Ruby asked, looking impressed as Giuseppe personally poured them wine and promised specialties not on the menu. "My father did some carpentry work for Giuseppe's family when I was a teenager," Kieran explained. "I used to help him during school breaks. They've treated me like family ever since, even after." He gestured vaguely at himself, all this being the fancy suit and the Fortune 500 company," Ruby smiled. "It's nice that you still come back." "Some things are worth preserving," Kieran said, watching as Ruby's face glowed in the candlelight. The evening was filled with delicious food, free-flowing conversation, and laughter. Ruby told him about her most challenging cases, her eyes lighting up when she described saving a newborn with a congenital heart defect. Kieran shared stories about his most meaningful projects, the affordable housing development his company had built in his old neighborhood, the community center they'd renovated pro bono. "You're different than I expected," Ruby admitted as they shared tiramisu. "Mark made you sound like some ruthless corporate titan who eats small businesses for breakfast." Kieran winced. "I can be ruthless when necessary, but it's always in service of something larger." "Like what?" "Like proving that ethical business can also be profitable. Like creating spaces that bring communities together instead of driving them apart." He hesitated, then added, "Like making my parents proud." Ruby reached across the table and touched his hand. "I think they must be very proud already." Her touch sent warmth up his arm, and Kieran found himself turning his palm to intertwine their fingers. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant somehow. After dinner, neither of them ready for the evening to end, they walked through the city streets. New York at night was transformed, the harsh edges softened by darkness, the windows glowing with countless lives being lived behind them. "I love this time of night," Ruby said, looking up at the buildings. "The city feels like it's breathing." "I usually only see it from my office window," Kieran admitted. "I forget to look sometimes." "That's a shame. There's so much to see if you're paying attention." As if to prove her point, she tugged him toward a small park where a street musician was playing violin. They stood listening, Ruby's head eventually resting against Kieran's shoulder, his arm finding its way around her waist. The music soared around them, and for the first time in years, Kieran felt truly present. When he finally walked her to her door, the goodnight kiss seemed inevitable. It was gentle at first, a question more than a statement. When Ruby responded by stepping closer, deepening the kiss, Kieran felt something inside him shift, like a piece of himself long misplaced had finally been found. "I'd like to see you again," he said when they finally pulled apart, his voice rough with emotion. Ruby smiled up at him, her fingers still curled in the fabric of his shirt. "I think that can be arranged, Mr. CEO." In the weeks that followed, Kieran found himself restructuring his carefully organized life around Ruby. Morning runs in Central Park became a shared ritual. Lunch breaks transformed into quick visits to her hospital when their schedules aligned. Evenings and weekends, once filled with work and solitude, were now rich with possibilities. Ruby introduced him to her world of medical colleagues, neighborhood farmers markets, and impromptu picnics. Kieran showed her architectural marvels hidden in plain sight, took her to construction sites where his visions were becoming reality, and even brought her to a family dinner with his parents in their modest Queens home. "She's lovely," his mother said in Spanish when Ruby went to help his father with the dishes. "And she looks at you like you hung the moon, Mijo." "It's only been a month, Mama," Kieran cautioned, though he couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. "Sometimes a month is all you need to know," she replied wisely. "Your father asked me to marry him after 3 weeks. And she made me wait 6 months for an answer," his father called from the kitchen, making them all laugh. Watching Ruby chat animatedly with his parents, switching effortlessly between English and the basic Spanish she'd learned during her medical training, Kieran felt a certainty growing in him. This woman, with her brilliant mind, compassionate heart, and infectious laugh, was becoming essential to him. Not everything was smooth sailing. Their schedules often clashed: Ruby's emergency surgeries and overnight shifts, Kieran's international business trips and early meetings. They had their first real argument when Kieran missed a dinner with her sister because a major deal was falling apart. "I understand emergencies," Ruby said, her voice tight with disappointment. "But you could have at least called yourself instead of having your assistant do it." "I was in back-to-back crisis meetings," Kieran defended, exhaustion making his tone sharper than intended. "The company had millions riding on this deal. And I had my sister flying in specifically to meet you," Ruby countered. "Do you have any idea how hard it was to coordinate our schedules?" "She's a flight attendant, Kieran. She rearranged shifts for this." The argument escalated, with Ruby accusing him of prioritizing work above everything else, and Kieran feeling unfairly judged for responsibilities he couldn't simply abandon. They parted that night without resolving things, both too stubborn and hurt to bend. The next morning, Kieran sat in his corner office overlooking the city, unable to focus on the contracts in front of him. His assistant knocked tentatively on his door. "The board is waiting in the conference room, sir," Kieran nodded, gathering his materials. Then he paused, a realization washing over him. "Cancel the meeting, sir, reschedule, family emergency." He was already reaching for his coat. "And order a bouquet of sunflowers delivered to Dr. Patel at Metro General. Add a note. I'm sorry, you're right, Kay." He found Ruby in the hospital cafeteria, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well either. When she saw him, her expression was guarded. "What are you doing here? Don't you have that board meeting today?" "I rescheduled it," Kieran said, sitting across from her. "Some things are more important." Ruby's face softened slightly. Like what? Like telling the woman I'm falling in love with that she deserves better than what I gave her yesterday. Like apologizing to her sister and rescheduling that dinner. He reached across the table, palm up. Like making sure you know that while my company matters to me, you matter more. Ruby looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. You're falling in love with me, completely. Terrifyingly so. A slow smile spread across her face as she placed her hand in his. Well, that's convenient because I'm falling in love with you too. Their relationship deepened over the following months. Kieran found himself delegating more, trusting his executive team with tasks he'd once insisted on handling personally. Ruby introduced him to her close-knit group of friends from medical school, people who treated him as Kieran rather than as a CEO. They developed routines and inside jokes, favorite takeout orders and preferred sides of the bed. When Ruby's lease was up 6 months later, the question of moving in together arose naturally. After considering both their places, they decided to find somewhere new, a fresh start that belonged to both of them. They found a spacious apartment in a historic building halfway between the hospital and Kieran's office, with large windows and a terrace perfect for morning coffee. Are we really doing this? Ruby asked as they signed the lease, her eyes bright with excitement and a touch of nervousness. We really are, Kieran confirmed, feeling more certain of this decision than any business deal he'd ever made. Unless you're having second thoughts. Not even for a second, she assured him, sealing the promise with a kiss. Moving day was chaotic, Kieran's minimalist furniture clashing with Ruby's eclectic collection of colorful pieces. They compromised and combined, creating a space that reflected both their personalities. His sleek entertainment system sat alongside her overstuffed bookshelves. Her vibrant artwork brightened his austere decor. They stayed up late unpacking, christening each room with laughter and love. This is the first place that's ever really felt like home, Kieran admitted as they lay in bed that night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Ruby propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. What about your penthouse, or your parents' house? The penthouse was just somewhere to sleep between workdays. And my parents' place, he paused, considering, it's where I'm from but not where I belong, not anymore. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Home is where you are now. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ruby's eyes filled with tears as she leaned down to kiss him softly. I like being your home. Their first year together flew by in a blur of professional achievements and personal milestones. Ruby was promoted to head of pediatric cardiology at Metro General, the youngest person ever to hold the position. Kieran's company won a prestigious award for sustainable urban development and opened an international office in Singapore. Through it all, they supported each other's ambitions while building their shared life. They learned to balance independence with togetherness, to fight fairly and make up thoroughly, to celebrate each other's victories as their own. On their one-year anniversary, Kieran took Ruby back to the baby shower where they'd first met, now transformed into a first birthday party for Mark and Elise's son, Noah. The backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers, tiny guests tottering around with frosting-covered faces. Hard to believe it's been a year, Ruby said, watching Noah attempt to smash cake into his mouth while his parents laughed. Best year of my life, Kieran replied, squeezing her hand. Mark approached them, his son propped on his hip. Look who it is, Noah. It's your Uncle Kieran and Aunt Ruby, the people who owe Daddy big time for introducing them. We've thanked you repeatedly, Ruby reminded him with a laugh, including that ridiculously expensive baby stroller. And the college fund, Kieran added. Details, Mark waved dismissively. I'm still taking credit for the most successful matchmaking in history. As the party wound down, Kieran suggested a walk through the neighborhood. The evening was warm, the streets quiet as they strolled hand in hand, reminiscing about that first meeting and everything that had followed. Remember how you thought I was some cold-blooded corporate monster? Kieran teased. Remember how you thought I was just another doctor with a god complex? Ruby countered, bumping her shoulder against his. They had wandered to a small neighborhood park, empty now except for them. Kieran led Ruby to a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, its petals creating a pink canopy above them. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly serious. "An anniversary gift." Ruby looked curious as he reached into his pocket. "We said no big gifts." "It's not big," Kieran said, his heart pounding as he withdrew a small velvet box. "But I hope it's meaningful." Ruby's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a vintage emerald ring surrounded by delicate diamonds. "Kieran." "I found it at an estate sale," he explained, voice thick with emotion. "The jeweler said it's from the 1920s. It reminded me of your eyes and how they were the first thing I really saw that day at the baby shower." He took a deep breath, then slid off the bench to kneel before her. "Ruby Patel, you walked into my life when I wasn't looking for anything but a quick escape from a baby shower. Instead, I found the person who makes every day brighter, every challenge more surmountable, every victory more meaningful." His voice wavered slightly. "You've taught me that success isn't measured in buildings constructed or deals closed, but in moments shared and love given. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled onto Ruby's cheeks as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak for a moment. Then she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him backwards. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into a kiss that contained all the promise of their future together. "I can't believe this is happening," Ruby said when they finally broke apart, admiring the way the emerald caught the light. "Wait until I tell Elise. She's going to claim credit for this too." "Let her," Kieran laughed, helping Ruby to her feet. "I owe her and Mark more than I can ever repay." They walked home wrapped in each other's arms, planning and dreaming aloud. A spring wedding, perhaps. A honeymoon somewhere neither of them had been. Children someday when the time was right. A lifetime of mornings waking up beside each other, of challenges faced together, of love that grew stronger with each passing year. As they reached their apartment building, Ruby paused to look up at the windows of their home, now glowing with warmth in the gathering darkness. "You know what's funny," she said, turning to Kieran with a smile that still made his heart skip. "I almost didn't go to that baby shower. I was exhausted from moving and thought about sending a gift instead. And I almost bailed to handle a work crisis," Kieran admitted, pulling her close. "Thank God for Mark's relentless guilt trips." "Thank God for baby showers," Ruby agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him under the stars, the promise of their future sealed between them. 2 years later, they would welcome twins of their own, a boy and a girl who would inherit Ruby's green eyes and Kieran's determined spirit. Mark and Elise's son would become their best friend and honorary cousin. Kieran's company would establish a foundation for pediatric cardiac research, inspired by Ruby's work. Their lives would intertwine in ways neither could have imagined that spring afternoon when a reluctant CEO met a brilliant doctor over baby shower games. But that night, as they celebrated their engagement with champagne on their terrace, all that mattered was the present moment, two people who had found each other when they least expected it, building a love story one day at a time.